edit my name just to
Go for it.
get the promo proper.
Perfect. Okay, right. Hello and welcome back to the Drop Step podcast. We are back. I believe it is NBA Cup final night. There's tension in the air, Charlie. How are you feeling? Guys, just in case you haven't read the title, Charlie Cummings is back, aka at Claytheist11 on Twitter and Blue Sky. Charlie, are you a Blue Sky guy yet?
I'm quietly holding my Blue Sky stock. I haven't quite done the whole cross posting yet, but if those links continue to be nuked on Twitter, then the migration may happen sooner than I expected.
Yes. Yeah, I just have this force of habit of I like Blue Sky. I like the community here. Let's go and look on Twitter. Like, I need to break out of that. It's just we'll see, and we'll sort of rebuild from there. But speaking of rebuilds, Charlie, we're talking about an article that you wrote back during the summer, and we're talking about two types of bad. We're talking about the Utah Jazz and this sort of two timeline thing that they're doing, where it doesn't really feel like they've massively committed one way or another with a rebuild, or at least it didn't feel like that in summer. Obviously, the standings paint a different picture right now, but they're a little bit of an enigma, this team in Salt Lake. How do you feel about the Jazz? How do you feel about them this season? And, are they as interesting as we're sort of building them up to be?
Yeah, so I think something with the Jazz, when I wrote that article that was fascinating to me, is there's so many different ways to go about team building. And you can go the full teardown, you can try to retool, you can try to find out the space in between. But by and large, the worst place to be is stuck in the middle. If you're not quite bad enough to get that top talent in the draft, that really hamstrings you. I think we've seen, especially with how this new CBA has affected the league, arguably the best way to now acquire star talent is the draft, because the restrictions aren't there. You just get to drop that player in. It's very hard to lose them because they're so incentivized to take that first contract with their team. So you draft that guy, and now you're thinking, well, we've got a good 8 years if all things go right. And the Jazz were interesting to me because you see this team where they have the Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert era. They play a beautiful brand of basketball. The defense was fun. Like, the most exciting the Jazz have been since the Malone Stockton days. And it all comes to a head. You end up tearing it down. You get some very interesting pieces in return. And then they just go down the path, the Danny Ainge path, which has just fascinated me. And that's why I'm glad that you thought it was so interesting too, because I think it just begs the question of, like, maybe there is just a wrong way to build a team. And my primary concern was, well, if you've collected all of this talent, you still have all of these existing veterans, the Jordan Clarksons, Colin Sexton, Lauri Markkanen, John Collins. Like, you're not quite talent poor enough to be as bad as you need to be. But yet here they are, by record as the third worst team in the league at time of recording, heading into an extremely loaded draft. So it's interesting to see how they've gotten here, because I don't think this is quite what they intended.
Yeah, we've been on a weird sort of spiritual journey, I'd say. In pre-pod, we were really talking about Will Hardy and like how incredible it is that usually you look at these rebuilding teams, it can't be easy for a coach to sort of look good with the kind of group of players that a rebuilding team is looking to assemble. But Will Hardy has absolutely done that. He's sort of taken his cast of misfits, renegades, and wily old veterans over the past 2 seasons and substantially overperformed with his teams up until the trade deadline, where Danny Ainge sort of did the best to sort of rein them back in and try and get back in that tank race. And it's like you said, it's left them in this weird position where I think you wrote in your article, which is going to be linked down below. Make sure, I would say, go and read Charlie's article now, come back to the pod, and it will sort of frame it nicely, because that's what I did before I messaged Charlie, and it's certainly where I'm coming at it from. But it left them not in Victor Wembanyama range, not in Brandon Miller, Amen Thompson range. It left them in Taylor Hendricks range when you look at their own sort of draft pick. It left them with these mid and late first rounders because the teams that they've engaged with on that big Rudy Gobert and that big Donovan Mitchell trade have largely been really good, right?
Mm.
They might have had, a couple of scrapes here and there. I know that Minnesota took a season to get going. Cleveland had horrible injury luck last year, and sort of Darius Garland's face got broken in half, and now he's sort of back to all-star form. But the picks haven't been the best, so it's left them, I think, as you've put it, in a logjam situation where they've used the picks. There are guys on the roster, but is it actually the best development environment?
Yeah, so that's what's interesting too. And I think so much of this comes back to the presence of Will Hardy, because I think the idea was, let's take all these shots on this talent. Let's try to catch lightning in a bottle with some of these picks. Like you said, they didn't have the premium type picks. They weren't bad enough to be in the Wembanyama sweepstakes.
Yep.
They weren't even bad enough for, the Brandon Millers of the world, the Amen Osar Thompsons. So they were left trying to find that sort of level of talent with less than premium draft picks. And any way you slice it, I mean, I think the one thing they have done really well is the front court. We've seen Walker Kessler. He's just, once again, Utah has done it with finding a dominant floor-raising defensive force.
Yep.
Young too. I think he's an incredible player, and Kyle Filipowski's looked really good. And the rest of it is just tough right now. I mean, looking up and down this team, it's just hard to find someone that you feel really good about. There were some exciting moments from Keontae George, but it's difficult when you see someone that has those kind of built-in flaws, where he's slight of build, he's not the tallest guy, he's not the most efficient, and you haven't really seen him make any inroads to develop that. He's still extremely inefficient, especially inside the arc, which has been very difficult.
Yeah.
And a lot of these other guys just have not been panning out. Somehow Utah has the lowest efficiency point guard in the league in terms of points per shot attempt in Isaiah Collier, and also the lowest efficiency wing by the same metric in Cody Williams. Cody Williams is somehow scoring 63 points per 100 shot attempts.
Oh,
it's just rough. And
they're Joe Fulks numbers, I think.
Yeah, those are very much Joe Fulks numbers. It's tough. It's Michael Olakandi territory, where you're just like, oh my God, I don't think this dude knows how to do basketball on the basic level. And so that's what's interesting to me, is like, my point in the article that I was trying to make is, well, you're not bad enough to get these premium picks, and this plan is not set up to get to those picks. And now they find themselves in that position where they're very bad. There's other teams in the NBA that have a little more going on the roster that keeps them at a level above Utah. But that's not what they intended. Like, they have a coach who's clearly a stud. He's clearly an incredible floor raiser. He knows what to do with this talent. They have a good group of vets, some of them who are playing extremely well, like John Collins, who I'm interested to talk more about later. And then they're this bad because they just can't get any progression out of these young players. Kessler came in and he was an extremely high-level defensive force.
Yep.
He's gotten a bit better, but I think he's done that of his own volition, really. The rest of these guys are just not panning out. And I think when you look at them too, even with the draft picks of this year, like, there have been some interesting defensive flashes from Collier, but they have 8 guys right now on this roster who are on rookie scale deals. And I think I only really feel good about 2 of them. And they both play the same position. So
right.
It's just so rough when you look at this, and it's like, well, the intent was, let's take the shots, like, let's go for the high upside guys. And really the only ones that they've hit on is when they went a little safer. So in my mind, you have like 6 dart throws that they've taken, and they haven't even hit the board with any of them. Shout out to Chuck for that one. But that I think is what really concerns me. Is it's like you ended up in the place that you're supposed to be at, which is being really bad
Yeah.
with a high quality draft class coming up, but you didn't mean it. I don't think Utah went into this season intending to be a bottom 3, bottom 5 roster in the league, and yet here they are.
So I would like 90% agree with you there, where I'd say I think at the time that you wrote your article, the Lowry to Golden State rumors were really in sort of full flow. And it seemed like, for whatever reason, Utah were holding firm. They weren't taking draft capital. They weren't taking Jonathan Kuminga. They were probably holding on for Brandon Pajemski to be included in a trade, something along those lines. And it really looked like they were committing to this idea of like a halfway house where the talent had obviously depleted. They had enough young guys that they weren't going to be great. But then you've got fringe all NBA player Lowry Markkinen on your team. And it almost looked like, oh, great. They're going to win 28, 30 games again, and they're going to have the 6th, 7th best odds instead of the 2nd or 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say, at least for me, looking at the season, looking at Utah prior to the season, I did have them penciled in as 15th in the West, but I thought that the process would look different, where it would almost look a bit Toronto Raptors-y, where it's a load of close losses every night. The process looks really good. You're having flashes from the young guys consistently, but you don't have the talent to compete with the entire rest of the Western Conference. And I thought that they might tank that way. But like you said, Charlie, you only feel good about like 2 of the guys that they have on these rookie deals. I would add, if it weren't for that sort of horrific injury that he suffered, I'm still a big Taylor Hendricks guy. I've got hope that he's going to pan out in the future. I thought he actually looked really good in that half season post All-Star break last year. But yeah, it's almost like the vibes have been really, really good for the last 2 years, but it's meant that they haven't been able to get this elite talent through the door. And now they're going to be able to, but the vibes are turning. So, you can't have it both ways in Utah, apparently.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what interested me too. Going a little deeper into the Lowry point, I think what fascinates me too is that you have Ryan Smith comes in, new ownership. He wants to invest. He's put a ton of money into this team, and he's completely changed things. From what I know, like the culture there is fantastic. Everyone's bought all the way in. And you have Danny Ainge, who has his deep ties to Utah on a personal level, and he wanted to make this a thing. What I heard from multiple people, I'm not always big sources guy, but
Sure.
when the right people tell you things, you listen to them. By and large, everything I heard is it was Markkinen really likes being in Utah. He likes this team. He likes the state. He likes the culture they've built. There was no price that they were going to reach where they would actually part with him. So I think it was a really funny instance of like, yes, Danny Ainge is always going to be willing to listen in on trade calls, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to get anything done. And the Warriors the last few years have been the kings of just like leaking their own trade reports to make it look like they are trying to acquire more star talent.
Sure.
I mean, we see it all the time. Like now they're in on Jimmy Butler and they're in on the Bulls guys, and there's Markkinen and Paul George and everything. And I don't think they've come close to any of these guys. So it was a very funny, like, media storm coming together of 2 teams, I think very dishonestly negotiating with each other. So that part was interesting to me. And what I've really taken away from that is it made too much sense. It made too much sense to trade Lowry to not go through with it.
Right.
I think if you're looking to bottom out, which they are now currently doing, he's not the guy you want around because he's so stable. He brings that great 2-way impact. I think he's a great floor raiser, even if he doesn't have the kind of elite offensive talent he would need to be like fully actualized in his role. And they didn't trade him because he's so in love with Utah. And this is the thing that really interests me about them. And one guy in the future too that I think is a big point of this is AJ Dubnsa. Um,
Yeah,
going, he's gone through prolific prep in Utah. He got a ton of money to go to BYU, money that came from Ryan Smith.
yeah.
Um, and
Uh,
it makes you wonder, like, are Danny Ainge and Ryan Smith just trying to build basketball in Utah as like a whole
a
concept?
holistic. Yeah.
Yes, like yeah, like a holistic concept, like basketball is a presence in Utah. Or are they trying to build a good team? And where does the priority lie there? Because I'm really not sure. It's such a unique thing where, I'm all for it. Like, it's an underdeveloped basketball market. The people there love that team. And so they want to build this culture. But at what point does building this basketball culture in your state start to affect the team that you've been hired to run?
Yes. No. So Charlie, we'll talk about like some of the 2025 prospects a bit later, but I'm really glad that you brought up AJ because I've seen reports that, since he's been paid all this money to go and sign with BYU, I think he committed like a week and a half ago to go and play for them next season. Like you said, he's come through sort of the high school system in Utah as well. Are we more likely to have a frozen envelope Patrick Ewing situation, or are we more likely to have a Chris Webber in 1993, like Utah has to trade up to get their man? Like, because if we have Victor Wembanyama somehow get into the Spurs in 2023, where everyone said before, oh, it's perfect, it's exactly where he wants to go. Yeah, they've got the lineage and everything. And then we have the guy that has already been paid a significant amount of money to play basketball in Utah and has come up through there magically sort of like land in the Jazz's laps. I, I'm starting to hear like the Mike Korzemba NBA conspiracy music playing.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too, is like I'm not always, like we see it with the NBA conspiracy people all the time where it's like, oh, so and so game was fixed to do this and blah blah
Yeah.
blah. And they think every result is like preordained. And I've never been that guy, but you have to acknowledge the NBA has a rich history of just pushing things slightly in their favor.
Yeah.
Like you said, the frozen envelope, uh, David Stern's famous, my ideal finals would be the Lakers playing the Lakers kind of thing, and then
Yeah.
definitely pushing some results for the Lakers.
Yeah.
Um,
What was it? Kings like game 6, game 7, 2002 or something
yep,
like that. Yeah.
2002 Game 6, one of the most horrific crimes ever done on a small market that we've ever
Yeah.
seen. Um, but that's the thing that fascinates me is, and I do believe that the NBA, when it comes to a talent like Wembanyama, where they're like, this is the future face of the league, like we don't want to put the future of our league in the hands of a franchise that we don't believe is competent. So, do I think they massage things a little bit to get him to somewhere like San Antonio? Yeah. Um, what I think is that Ryan Smith thinks he can shuffle the deck so much in his favor that it becomes too much of a storybook where he's like, hey, we've got the homegrown Utah guy, and
Yes. Yeah.
oh, look at that. We're really bad in 2026. Like, wouldn't it be crazy if he just ended up here? And it almost feels like an owner trying to buy his way to the top of that draft to secure that talent. And I'm not going to knock the hustle. Like, if that's the intent, I get it. Like if you think that you can, sort of insert yourself into the script in such a way that they're like, you know what, maybe it would be really cool to have this, and maybe this revitalizes that franchise.
You
Um,
you also have the sort of like double chance as well of you have a nice Kambuza narrative as well, where it's like his dad was playing there when Kambuza was born. So if all Ryan Smith has to say to Adam Silver is top 2 pick, top 2 pick and you have your narrative, it's fine. We can spin it either way. Yes, we might rather AJ, and it will come to sort of pass whether Boozer or DeBancer like emerges as that top pick in that 2026 class, or Darren Peterson, I think, is
Mhm.
like the third guy out of that trio. But I know that a lot of like NBA draft heads on Twitter or Blue Sky, I might have to get used to saying Blue Sky in the next few weeks, months, are big Peterson fans. But it does feel like, they're in that small market. They're investing a ton, not just on the NBA and the college side, but I think that they've set up their own hockey team as well. Is it like the
Oh
Utah
yeah.
Avalanche? So much money being poured in at this time. And like we said, they're sort of there, right? They're where we wanted them to be, even if they haven't made the moves that we thought they should have made, like that Lowry trade that you sort of referenced. And it sort of speaks to the talent that builds up around the NBA in the late stages prior to expansion. Like, in a few years' time, when we expand and we have 32, 33, 34 teams, Larry Markkinen is going to be able to lift you away from the doldrums of rock bottom. But, they've surrounded him with, like you said, 8 guys on rookie contracts, and they're just sort of like fighting to keep Lowry, Colin Sexton, and John Collins down there. Should we talk about the vets for a second? I say vet. Should we talk about the guys in
Yes.
their mid-20s, and then we'll sort of get younger and younger as we move down?
Yeah, that is the thing that's funny too, is the quote unquote vets,
Yeah,
where you
it's
have
it's
like,
Patty Mills, and then
yeah,
it's like
like
25-year-old, 26, 27-year-olds.
you have the Patty Mills, and Patty Mills is like that to me is like the perfect encapsulation of like, we're a tanking team. Let's bring in a guy with like more than a decade of NBA experience, twilight of his career. Like, we're not super relying on him on the court, but you want someone like that who has always found a way to fill a role. He has his international experience too. Like, he's just a wealth of knowledge for these young guys, which I
Yes.
think is great. Like, I think that's a great thing to have. But then you have John Collins, who's 27, Colin Sexton, who's 26, Laurie, who's 27. Yes, they still have Jordan Clarkson, another guy who I know for certain they have refused to move just because he also loves Utah. Um, but it is interesting. Like, yeah, let's start with the older guys, because Clarkson is one of those where I think, kind of the time has passed to where they could actually move him and get something of significance, that would really further the rebuild.
Yeah.
I think at this point, he's still a good enough player in his own right, but inefficient, not transformative kind of player. And yeah, he's already 32. He's got a couple years left on the deal. So I think at this point you might as well just hang on and let him be the veteran in the room. I'm kind of curious where you think on how Jordan Clarkson falls into this.
No, I think he had that bubble last year where I think that the system that he was playing the system that he was playing in, really sort of artificially spiked the assist numbers. And then for a
Mhm.
brief moment, it like, hey, bucket getter Jordan Clarkson can now be your playmaker too. I think he was averaging close to like 6.5 assists per game on decent turnover ratio last year. So the time to move him probably would have been the deadline last year to a team that really needed sort of like ancillary scoring or a real boost to the second unit. But to me, it feels like he is in worst starter, good bench player territory now, right? And like you said, they've got so many priorities for players that they could move. What are they actually going to demand for a Jordan Clarkson? If Dennis Schroeder is getting moved to your Golden State Warriors for 3 second-round picks or a net sort of 2 second-round picks, and he's a couple years younger, and he's on an expiring deal, and he had like flame shooting out of his behind to start the season.
Yeah.
I don't know what Utah can exactly like demand for a guy like Jordan Clarkson. So absolutely, he's someone that now is going to be familiar with the system, can get them in and out of sets. Will Hardy doesn't have to focus a ton of coaching time on Clarkson anymore. He knows what's going to be required of him. I think that if Keontae wasn't on the roster, he might be more valuable, to where you could have that sort of like sacrificial lamb player where it's, I'm going to get us in and out of the stuff that we want to do. And we'll really focus on developing the wing talent, the big talent. but he feels quite redundant even from a playing point of view with the amount of touch time that Keontae George sees nowadays.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of putting it too. And I think, yeah, like looking at Schroeder, where, like you said, he's been absolutely nuts out of the gate to start
Yes.
this year. Younger, expiring on a cheaper deal, and they netted 2 second-round picks. So I don't, yeah, like Utah couldn't beat that price, and with the amount of, like, there's no way that they would get a better return on that for Clarkson. So yeah, would it be worth it to trade one of your only real veterans for maybe a second, maybe two? I don't really see it.
Nope.
So yeah, like I kind of think the ship has sailed there. And really the most interesting guy to me, because we've seen it with Laurie. It's clear that he's going to be staying through this year, possibly in the future. They think that he can bridge to that next team when they're eventually competitive. Um, the guy who really fascinates me is John Collins, because as I wrote about in my article, I was like, okay, well, if you're going to say we have a good coach, we have a couple of these vets, like, let's rip it down to the studs, let's see what he can work out with these young project type players. And then you go and add in John Collins. Granted, it was for almost nothing.
Yeah.
I think they gave up like a second rounder to get him.
I think it
And
was just salary relief, wasn't it? It was like they sent Rudy Gay, and it was almost one of those like, we'll just get above the salary floor with this. I think that Atlanta
mhm.
needed to get money off the books, and they basically took on $20 million, and the next couple of years of John Collins's contract for the pleasure of having one of the greatest reclamation projects that the league has seen this season.
Yeah, well, and that I think is what really interests me is, even though I wrote that piece in the off season, not that much has changed from Utah's perspective besides being much worse than expected.
Yep.
But on the other side of that, John Collins has been way better than anyone could have expected. I mean, he's averaging 18 and 8. He's playing good defense. He's somehow shooting 50, 40, 90, which is just like insane to think about. But I like that. That's what's so interesting to me is it's like, okay, well, he's 27. He's got this year. He's got next year on a player option that I think he would probably take. Because even though like he's getting up there in years, he's not going to see anywhere close to $27 million per year on the open
No.
market. So that looks like a player option he'd probably want to pick up. That to me is something that I'm going to be watching with great interest uh, through this deadline. Is if everything is going wrong and he's one of the only like positives you have here, um, the goal should be let's secure this future by being as bad as we can be
Yep.
this season. And if they go through that trade deadline and John Collins is still there, it really only solidifies my general thinking of what is this front office doing, because you took the low risk flyer. You, like you said, they basically just acquired him to get above that floor. Atlanta wanted salary relief. It worked out for everyone. He'd kind of worn out his welcome in a way there.
Yep.
So if you don't immediately turn around and turn a profit on that, I don't really understand it. It's like they bought low and the stock has only gone up, but every other stock that they buy has gone down. So
Yeah.
it's like you got to sell right now before you hold on too long and you end up with a Jordan Clarkson type situation where it's like, if he stays around, he gets a little older, maybe the shooting numbers come down, the shine wears off a little bit. Then you may find yourself in difficult territory.
And I read this good article done by Zach Cram of The Ringer today. And I think the
Mm.
first point that he made was about sort of there are a lot of these bigs on the market at the moment that are having really fun seasons. And he cited Nikola Vucevic. in Chicago, who again, if we're sort of surprised by the John Collins season, the Vucevic season has amazed me. When you look at his age, the shooting splits, it's I'd be drug testing him after every single game, and I'm sure that old Nicola is clean, but I just can't believe what I'm seeing. Rob Williams, another guy that has finally got himself healthy, has been phenomenal to start the year for Portland. Less flashy on the offensive numbers point of view, but like a playoff proven defender. And, a couple of other guys in the mix too. But I think the point that Zach made was there are these guys, but there's so much talent at the 5 right now that how do you sort of move them on? How do you go to a team like, give us real value when most of the teams in the league have their starting 5 absolutely nailed down, sorted, and kind of have a good backup big two? I think that's maybe where John Collins has a little more value, because you can pitch him as this 4-5 hybrid,
Right.
where I always like the idea of him in Denver as like say that like the Michael Porter Jr. contract became untenable and it was, screw it, we're going to sacrifice a bit of ceiling, but we're going to finally sort out our backup 5 issues, and we're going to have a super strong front court where it's like, we can run Aaron Gordon and John Collins at the 4-5 when Nikola Jokic sits, and you get like a plug and play wing in to replace Porter. But are there any fits for Collins that you like around the league, and what would be your asking price as Utah? Because we said they didn't really give up a ton. They gave up like potential salary flexibility to get Collins. Does it have to be a first? Is it multiple seconds? Is it just like you don't want to take that bad salary? You just want to secure that tank of all tanks?
Yeah, I think at this point they should try to get really anything for him that they
Yep.
can manage. One that does interest me, if you look at teams that are on the rise,
Yep.
they're about to hit that point where we've seen with a lot of these teams where it's you get a bunch of talent, you sign them all, and suddenly you find yourself in the first or second apron and you're really hamstrung
Yeah.
with what you can do. One team that has really interested me would be the Cavs. I'm
Right. Okay.
I'm looking at the salary sheet, and it would be a little bit difficult for them to pull it off salary wise. Like they'd have to make some tough
Like,
decisions. Like they'd
yeah, it'd
have
be
to.
like Karis LeVert and George Niang, right?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like that would be the deal. So it'd be okay. We're gonna stabilize our backups to Mobley and Allen, but the strength of this team comes from we have Darius Garland, we have Donovan Mitchell, we have some wings like Dean Wade, Isaac Okoro who can bring that defense. But the lifeblood of the team is the front court because you have
Yes.
Jared Allen, you have Mobley, and like you said with Collins, he can reasonably play the 4 or the 5 depending on who's around him.
Hmm.
So I think sort of making this 3-man rotation in the front court with guys, all 3 of whom can play the center, and 2 of them can very credibly play sort of the 4, be that second big man of like the dual bigs there. I think that would be really interesting because we've seen Cleveland; they've been sort of the upstart story of this year. Denver also is very interesting
Hmm.
because, like you said, I think they need to maybe play a little bit more for floor, where it's just like let's bring in as many people as we can to be stable, and then just hope that the best player in basketball can deliver us to where we need to go.
Yeah.
Um, they're a very interesting fit there. I wonder with some other teams if he would be useful. Like there are other teams, it doesn't even necessarily have to be contenders. Where I think you look around the league, and like a team like Houston could possibly be interesting, where it's maybe they're a little
I
bit on the
mean,
outside, but you bring them a little more stability in there. Memphis
oh,
also interests me as well. Uh, I wonder if the LA teams could get involved, although their cap situations are a little wonky.
so
Um,
just to come in on the LA teams, Charlie, like I was going to start us off with the Lakers, where they've got salary that they can move. They've got like they could do D'Angelo Russell and Gabe Vincent off the top of my head. I think they earn like nearly $29 million combined. D'Lo obviously expiring, so you get off a little bit of money as Utah. And finally, you can claim that Anthony Davis is playing the 4, not the 5. But you maintain that flexibility where Collins isn't like a big enough name that you always have to go double big. I think that could be really interesting. The Kings could finally send like, Kevin Herter and Trey Lyles. The return, Trey Lyles comes back to the Jazz triumphantly as they finally draft
The
like a
prodigal
brilliant
son.
player.
Yes.
Yeah, you believe it. Yeah, will be the welcome home party will not be one to forget. Like that makes a ton of sense to me, is just like your diet Denver, where they've been begging for credible backup 5 minutes for the last couple of seasons, and Collins would make a lot of sense there. The two like kind of tricky ones that I like are if Chris Middleton's injury issues persist, because we haven't mentioned Collins' salary yet. I think he's on like $26 million this year, which is a really, really big amount of money. And that's the kind of thing that has sort of like kept him in Utah to this point, despite like his production on the court. If Chris Middleton shows himself to be too much of an injury risk, they've experimented with like triple big lineups before, where I think that they had a couple of seasons under Mike Budenholzer in the playoffs where you saw Bobby Portis, Giannis, and Brook Lopez sort of all sharing the court at the same time. I think the fact that Collins has rediscovered the 3 ball could make that interesting. And he's athletic. This is a guy with a bit of athleticism that you can put around Giannis. Who would have dreamt it? Someone that can jump off the floor next to Giannis Antetokounmpo. And then the super crazy one, this is just because I read an article the other day that suggested that maybe the Celtics aren't too happy with like the long-term Kristaps projection. If you want that real like floor play where maybe you're worried that Porzingis' ankles give out again, there's something there where you could get like John Collins in as your pseudo like long-term Al Horford replacement, because he's kind of a similar stature, can space from outside, fits the system. And then you get another asset as the Celtics, where maybe you're adding one more rotation piece. So I think what we've illustrated in talking about that there is that there are plenty of options around the league for a guy like John Collins, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are tons of options, which I think, going back to my point is, yes, the salary is an obstacle, but because you have so much on the table, if you don't get something done, I don't understand what the point is.
Yes.
And it's different from how I feel about Laurie or about Colin Sexton, because they're both young. Yeah, Laurie just got paid, but I think that's going to be a deal that's worth it.
Yep.
Sexton is also under a decent amount of control, and they've played so well in Utah. I mean, obviously, like Laurie was one of the breakout stars, but Colin Sexton is quietly playing the best basketball of his life with the Jazz. So I don't view those two as a problem. And a lot of that is because, like we've said, going on this team, your roster is already full of these rookie scale guys, and you have so many draft picks coming down the pipeline. So if you were to explore the Sexton market, maybe you get a first round pick or two, maybe you get a couple of young players, but I don't really see that as being a huge benefit to trade him right now, because you already have this problem of having too much. You have, like we mentioned, the 8 guys who are on their rookie deals. None of them are going anywhere as far as we know.
Yeah.
And assuming the Jazz are not outside of the top 10 in the lottery, they're going to have 3 more first round picks coming in this year. So like the math just doesn't add up at a certain point. Like if you made the trade with Sexton or Markkanen, you'd be adding in tons of players. And I think you could find something with a guy like Collins where it's like you make yourself a little bit worse in the short term. You
Mhm.
get a nice boost on the amount of lottery balls you're going to get for this upcoming season. And maybe you get one or two good assets for him.
I
And that would be a net because, like we said, they got him for nothing. So if you
Yeah.
get him for nothing, you turn him into something. That's a win. You move on.
It's a single that you've batted in. It's not a home run play, but it's just like that sensible. It's a move that you might make on 2K where it's like I'm trying to get the assets to trade for a star. John Collins has been at our halfway house. He's benefited and now he's moving along basically. But even if you just wanted to say, I think you alluded to it earlier, Charlie. Like the Jazz have done a good job of drafting in the front court. You know, they have Lowry, who they picked up in that Mitchell deal, but they've drafted Kessler. They've drafted Kyle Filipowski, who I think that we both like quite a bit.
mhm.
You know, we want to just open up the minutes for those guys, and maybe we want to just get a Collins style level player to play at the 3-4 because they have a real sort of like dearth of wing talent, I think, in Utah at the moment. It's not really worked out for them when they've tried to draft at that like small forward, power forward position. So maybe you just say, like, right, we're going to downsize a little bit. We're going to go from a Collins to like a Bruce Brown, or, you know, in my crazy buck situation, Chris Middleton gets to play 20 minutes a night where he rehabs his ankle and, you know, he actually makes your young guys, he actually like provides a nice situation for your young guys to develop in without like threatening your tank too much. So lots of
Mhm.
options with John Collins. I think we should probably talk about this fun idea that you sort of mentioned pre-pod of buckets of players that the Jazz
Yes.
have drafted. So do you want to get us kicked off with the buckets, please, Charlie?
Yes, yeah. Buckets, obviously appropriate word. But I think we've seen some pretty distinctive strategies
Yep.
where you see it with Danny Ainge. Danny Ainge has never met a combo guard in the mid to late lottery that he hasn't wanted to draft or
Uh-huh.
later on in the draft. So we've seen them go for those types of guys with Keontae George, with Isaiah Collier, different builds, but still moderately the same, where it's like you probably don't just want this guy running your offense, but he can run it in a pinch at times. He can be a good secondary type creator, one who can do some things off the ball. When you look at that wings group, it's just all projects. Taylor Hendricks, massive project. Bryce Sensabaugh had a lot of tools,
Yep.
some more immediately translatable, but he was a project. And Cody Williams, the most project of all. I haven't done my draft stuff as much recently, but all of my friends who I trusted were just like, I don't understand what this guy does well. He just has NBA size and
Yeah.
athleticism. Um, like they've taken the shots on those guys. And then you look at the front court, which is, I think, the thing they've done really well is they've gone for the size, the immediately translatable skills, with Walker Kessler. I mean, it was clear when he was at Auburn, it's like this guy is going to be a force defensively if he can just, move around laterally enough, and he
Sure.
can. And Filipowski too, where he has that size, but guys who are that big, who can shoot, who can handle a little bit, who have some passing feel, they're very high floor. And I don't mean that to say like, oh, he doesn't have like the kind of upside, but that skill type very rarely is the kind of player that just flames out completely.
Mhm.
So you really have like these three distinctive buckets of the players where they're going for the project combo guard types in the backcourt. They're going for total mystery box guys on the wings, and they're looking for immediate translatable skills with the bigs. And it's pretty clear which one of those have worked and which two have not, in my opinion, because it's just it's tough looking around outside of that front court to think what do we have long term. And the guy you mentioned too, in Taylor Hendricks, like the one who I think looked the most promising.
Yep.
Suddenly he suffers a horrific freak accident leg break, And now it's like, well, what do we do now? Like, what do we do on the wings now?
Yeah, it's almost like they just have one scout running the backcourt, one scout looking for swingmen, and one scout looking for the front court, and you know who's going to get the raise because, like you said, Charlie, like they've had a lot of success in one area, but the other two are just a little bit of a mystery to behold at the moment. I think it's sort of dawning on me, but like our friend Chuck in Darts, go check out Chuck. Recently featured on Chuck's podcast, as has Charlie. It's one of the best out there. Whenever he speaks about the Miami Heat, he speaks about them trying to draft guys that they know can cope in the NBA physically. Like,
Mm,
if you're strong, if you can bench X amount, you've got an interview with the Miami Heat. You've got an invite to a combine, to a scrimmage, basically. And if you look at all of the players that Utah has drafted, aside from Cody Williams, who will remain our mystery, they're all of the slightly chunkier variety. Like Keontae
mhm,
George came in during the 2023 draft class and he had quite a bit of excess weight, slimmed down for summer league, but he is a slightly bulkier, like smallest guy to have on the court.
mhm.
Isaiah Collier is an absolute wrecking ball. You know, it's like he's a little dynamo, but he's absolutely like he packs a punch in that frame. Bryce Sensabaugh, another guy that can really sort of throw his physicality round. Taylor Hendricks, great dimensions, great athleticism. And then the big guys obviously speak for themselves. They're hardly going to be lacking in physicality. So maybe that's the through line for them, but it's it does kind of almost feel like, do you should you have different approaches for each area of the court? Do the Jazz have enough flexibility that they can just do this? Because, Charlie, maybe it looks bad now. Maybe 6 of these 8 guys on the roster aren't re-signed for their next contracts, but the 2025 picks pan out, the 26 picks pan out. Is it just a case of, we've rolled the dice, it hasn't worked, but we trust the process, or do they have to start playing a different game entirely?
So that's where it becomes interesting to me because you can look at the positives. Like we've said, the front court, great. Like now like you could conceivably get 48 minutes of great center play just going between Kessler and Flip. Like
Yeah,
that, you've got one position locked down there. But with the other guys, it's so much tougher to figure out where this goes. And that is sort of what's interesting to me is, do they keep going with this process? Because you're going to see it in this 2025 class, especially when you look at the top. There's a lot of polish with Cooper Flag. Like he's unbelievably well rounded for his age. Like it's truly just preposterous how much of an NBA ready game he has.
yeah.
Dylan Harper is also looking like a star. Like he's no longer, like the also ran behind Cooper. It's like, no, this guy is legit. He's like a number one pick that's going to end up at number two. And then it gets a little iffier. So, that's the thing to me with the Jazz is it's like, do you try to pivot if find yourself at the top of this class? And do you go for like the trade up, like are you trying to put yourself in the Flag Harper type territory if you're bad enough? Um, and the problem is that if they don't get those top picks, you have a lot of question marks. You have Kasparis Yakashonis. I believe I'm saying that correctly.
Sounds
Uh,
good to me.
if it's good for me, it's good. If it's good for you, it's good for me. But Yakashonis, like he's got the athletic tools. He's got some really interesting skills. A lot of work needs to be done. Ace Bailey, I don't want to open the whole box of worms as it is that people talk about Ace Bailey,
Hmm.
but the guy's a project. Like he's got some unbelievable physical gifts and immediate talents. And he's also got a lot of issues to work out. So that's the thing to me that really, really begs the question, like, do the Jazz need to pivot if they don't find themselves at the top of the class. Because if you luck out, you hit all the lottery balls, you get one of Flag or Harper, you feel really good about things because those guys are polished. They have immediate skills that are not going to be overly hampered by the roster around them. I think they have skills that would elevate the players around them.
Yeah.
But if you don't get there and you find yourself drafting 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, can you take another project type guy? Like let's just use Ace as an example because I think Ace is the ultimate, like this guy has the potential
Boom
to,
or bust.
yeah, like be total boom or bust. But is Utah as currently constructed the kind of environment that would push him towards bust? Because we've seen it with him. Like he's an incredibly talented shot maker.
Yep.
Playmaking, playing within the flow of offense are a concern.
Yep.
Even with Will Hardy there, like it's like if he has almost no advantage creators around him and he has all of these other young guys with him who aren't making their shots, who are clogging up the floor for him. Especially on the defensive end, where it's like I think he looks like a very interesting defender long term.
Yeah.
Is he the kind of guy where they could bring him in day one and be like, hey, we're going to throw you at all of the tough assignments, like a Bilal Coulibaly in Washington.
Yeah.
Washington obviously has reaped a ton of benefits from that, but there is an inherent risk to just taking a guy and throwing him in the fire from day one.
I
And it
would
makes
just say
me
on
wonder.
I would just
Yeah.
say on Bailey really quickly, I haven't heard the comparison made sort of around the community yet, but in terms of a long-term role, like given his handle concerns at the moment, but his sort of athletic tools and that real clear shot making ability, I ironically think that some like semblance of what Lowry is doing in Utah right now
Mm.
could be a great fit for Ace long term, where it's like, I want you to be this ultimate play finisher. I'm going to try and utilize your gravity going away from the basket, not necessarily like being a turnover risk because you're taking 5, 10 dribbles at the top of the key. I wonder if he's a guy that needs to get moving, but how many of those players can you have if you've already got Lowry? Who you would rather is like running around off ball? If you've then
Right.
got Ace, if you're committing to a Kessler, who I think has actually looked a little bit better closer to the basket this season, whereas last year he was asked to be a little bit more of that handoff hub. Maybe it works if Filipowski is your guy long term and you have like this nice sort of fulcrum of your 5 being a playmaker, your 1 being a playmaker, and your 3, 4 being these elite off ball scorers. But like he is absolutely a really, really good snapshot of this debate. I would just say, Charlie, based off the conversation that we had about Debancer and Boozer earlier, my idea would be that they hedge their bets one more season. They do take a project player. Hopefully, they take him around the 3, 4, 5 mark instead of the 9, 16, and wherever they've taken the previous guys before. And they just hedge their bets for the lottery balls again to come out to play for a Debancer, for a Boozer, and you say that is our final year of tank. We have one more year of tank next year, and then we go full steam ahead from 2027.
Yeah, and that's what I think interests me too. Is I could absolutely get behind the vision of like we're going to give this another year
Yeah.
of trying to work on this form of drafting where, like you said, they go for the project, they see how it works, whether that's Ace, Yaktichonis, like I could get behind them going on someone like Derek Queen. Like that would be really fun just to see how that
Yeah.
pans out because, oh my God, that guy is incredible. So I could see that. But the thing that really, really is a little concerning to me is you look at this team as currently constructed. Like we've talked about all of the guys that they have on these deals. They're all expiring. I mean, not expiring. They're all under contract.
Yeah.
You have Colin Sexton and Walker Kessler up for extensions in this offseason. I think those are both guys that you want to keep around, of course.
Yep.
So really, like you have 3 incoming first round picks and the only players that you can realistically get off of are Drew Eubanks, Svi Mikhailuk, and Johnny Juzang. Those are all the guys with like non-guaranteed deals. No one's crying over those guys leaving, but it's more the concept of if you keep this existing core of veterans, you get rid of a couple guys who are, role-ish players like Eubanks and Svi, and then you just drop in three more
Three more.
picks. Three more. Yeah. And like that's where it starts to get concerning to me is now what do you do if you continue with the plan of this? We're going for the project guys. We're trying to see how it works out.
Mhm.
Well, like teasing out the hypothetical, if they get one of those higher picks, but they don't get one of the top two guys available, and you're left with all of these projects, does it leave you in good position to tank to the top of the Dibansa, Darren Peterson, Boozer class? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But then how do you make the decisions? Like, how do you evaluate which of these guys are able to stay?
Do do
Yeah,
you fall into like a Pistons scenario where they had no idea if Kate Cunningham was like a true number one, number two player because the environment becomes so unfavorable to play in next year, and it's almost like you lose these years of development? I think from what we've been saying, what I would say is maybe what they would need to do is, even if they can't trade up to 1-2, maybe stop taking these swings in the mid first, in the late first round. Try and get to late lottery, mid lottery. If you want to take two picks, like make sure we have a cap on the amount of picks that we're making.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you said, Derek Queen isn't a guy that's currently threatening to go in the top 5, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's a late lottery guy, like by the end of the year, based off the production, and he's definitely going to be sort of a swing player as we carry on evaluating the class. Don't miss out on him for the sake of like having another one of these fun bets at 27, 29, 32, as they have in like the past years. So it's almost like that middle move of we're not going to sell the farm, but we are going to take a slightly different approach where we're having less rolls of the dice, but we're trying to strengthen them a little bit.
Yeah, and that too, you could look at a team like San Antonio where they had that extra first round pick.
Yep.
And extra in the sense of like they had more than they came in with, and they're like, Castle's our guy. Maybe they didn't necessarily love anyone around the 8th pick. So they're like, well, Minnesota's calling. We can kick the can down the road. The difference to me is that I think the Spurs are able to do that from a position of strength because
100%.
they really, obviously they have Wembanyama, but they also really like Devin Vassell. They've gotten a lot of good production out of Jeremy Sohan, and they felt confident in Castle as their guy. He's not my favorite prospect, but that was the vision that they felt was what they could build on going forwards, where they're like, we have this all-world talent. We have a couple of good defensive pieces around him. We think Vassell can be like the number 2 type scorer. So we're not desperate to add in as much talent as possible. The problem for me is that Utah would be doing that from a position of weakness,
Yeah.
where other teams can look at them too and look in this inevitable roster crunch that's headed for them. And if suddenly Danny Ainge calls you up, if, they have like the 20th pick in this draft, from Minnesota, depending on where they end up falling, or
Sure.
Cleveland, like a late first. And if he's calling some team up saying, hey, like we can trade you this first rounder, but we want more assets down the line, can they even get a good price for that? Because these other teams will know that there's desperation involved. Like
Yes.
if Utah is willing to trade away those later picks, the other GMs will know, oh, well, this means that they're not comfortable adding in all of this talent in the short term.
Yeah.
So we can really try to squeeze them here. And that I think is where it becomes kind of a problem is, if everyone else sees the impending doom of having all of these picks and not many of them panning out coming, are you even able to get the right trade prices when they all know what you're trying to do?
Yeah, and because every self-respecting GM is going to know that the most valuable pick that Utah has come 2025 draft time is going to be their own first in 25 and their own first in 26, because they at least have some say in where that's going to fall. They know that they're not going to use these spare first rounders to add, starter level talent. They're not going to go out there and make win now moves, because unlike the Spurs, who don't need to rely on their own pick to get that superstar talent because he's already in the building, the Jazz need to stay bad if they want to secure a superstar, unless Danny Ainge decides to throw it all the way back to 2007-8, and do the complete flip the script and try and get in like 3 superstars in the space of an off season. I think that's definitely harder to do in Utah than it was in Boston, and I think that they were like a very specific set of circumstances that happened when he assembled the Ray Allen, KG, Paul Pierce team. Like, teams are going to know you only want to do one thing with these first round picks. You don't have a ton of optionality. You can't sort of threaten like maybe Brooklyn could last off season, where I think Brooklyn very feasibly could have said to who had their picks. It was the Rockets, right? Brooklyn really
Rockets,
could have
yeah,
said to the Rockets, look, we're either going to pull this Mikal Bridges deal if you give us our picks back, or we'll go and trade for Brandon Ingram, Zach LaVine, Trey Young, and suddenly your picks that you're really counting on being valuable, they're not, because we can sort of commit to being okay for the next couple of years. It's like they don't have any of that leverage anymore, so
right.
they really can only use those picks for one thing. Yeah, it's interesting. Poor Danny Ainge, the tables are finally going to turn where he's going to be at a disadvantage in these trade conversations.
Yeah, and it does feel like they've painted themselves into a corner because I agree with the premise of drafting star talent has never been more important.
Yeah.
A lot of my friends who either have worked or currently work for teams in the league, when I talk to them, they talk about this as being a priority, where if you can capture that talent, like you mentioned with Houston is in the position they're in because they bottomed all the way out after Harden left. They acquired all of these top picks, but they kept getting something out of them. Like everyone has their opinions on Jalen Green and Jabari Smith, but they've proven themselves to be capable at several things. And then you have Amen Thompson, who looks like an absolute stud. Reed Shepard, he's had a kind of rough start this year, but I think so many people are high on him in the long term. So you have the teams that have hit on all of these things reaping the benefits. And yeah, I really do think the Jazz have painted themselves into a corner here because everyone is just looking at them thinking, well, this is clearly a team that's all the way in on this upcoming draft and the draft after that.
Yeah.
But will they be able to make the moves that help consolidate their position in those drafts and get value for what they have to offer?
So the only other thing you could do with these picks is you could say, let's spend these picks on young guys that are already in the league, that have maybe like a really high ceiling, but they're not gonna like escalate us into like contenders in the West, where you're not trading for a 27-year-old in his prime. Maybe you're trying to trade for a 21-year-old. Charlie, are there any, and I admit this is like catching you maybe off guard a little bit here, if Utah were to say, we have all of these spare first round picks, we either have to like move them down the line into 2032 first, 2031 firsts, or we have to take some bets around the league on young players who aren't going to make us win now, but could be more exciting parts of our future than the likes of Isaiah Collier, Cody Williams, all of the guys that we've discussed so far today. is there anyone that you'd really like to see Utah target? Any like young guys that look a little bit spare somewhere that could really, really fit into that system?
Yeah, I think there are a couple. I think one that has looked really interesting to me is call up the Washington Wizards. Let's say this offseason, like they've tanked all the way to the bottom, they've
Yep.
secured one of those top picks. They're like, okay, we've got the player that we needed here. We have a Flag or a Harper.
Yeah.
Um, Go figure out the asking price for Corey Kispert.
Oh, phew, okay.
Like
I thought you were going to say Bilal Coulibaly, and I was like, "There's no way that's
no,
going to
no,
be
no.
like a yeah, right,
If I were Will Dawkins, if I remember correctly, that's their GM.
yeah, yeah,
I'm hanging up the phone and laughing if anyone asked about Bilal Coulibaly because they have a star on their hands.
yeah,
Um, but so what I think would be interesting is go to these other teams that are right in the middle of the tank and try to identify the players who are young, cost controlled, like Kispert. I believe his deal is like 4 years, 54
yeah,
million. Like exceedingly reasonable for a guy who has the movement shooting chops, who fits a very defined role, who's shown a little bit defensively. Um, and try to, say, well, we have a couple of these younger guys who haven't quite panned out. Maybe it's a Sensabaugh and whatever other young players haven't really panned out that they feel comfortable parting with.
yeah.
Um, Maybe they throw a couple of those guys together, some other salary, a pick down the road, and they start to consolidate things around the young guy that they have.
A Denny Avdia style trade, like the one that Portland pulled, exactly where I think that they had a quote unquote spare pick at 14. Washington wanted to draft Bub Carrington, and it made sense for both teams for Portland to sort of consolidate because they had the likes of Tumani Kamara. I can never remember his name. What's the Murray brother in Portland?
Oh, Chris Murray. Yeah.
Chris Murray. I always want to go Kyler, who I think plays in the NFL. They had a lot of these young prospects, and it just made sense for them to get like a little bit more of an adult in the room. Kispert's a really good name when you're talking about that because, like you said, he's cost control for the next like 3-4 years, right?
Yeah, like if you were going in this offseason, you'd have 4 years of Kispert. You'd have him through his age 30 season.
Yep.
Um, that kind of player too, like assuming they were to keep Markkanen around, it's like, oh, well, now we can run all of sort of the same actions
Yes.
for him above the perimeter. So you have a really good system fit there. And you have the kind of player, if you get a Coop's going to be like playing the 4, maybe the 5, maybe the 3, but he's the kind of guy who could play alongside a Corey Kispert. Same for Dylan Harper. It's like, while we try to figure out if this is the guy who can be like that 1A offensive option, let's put someone alongside him who draws a lot of attention off the ball, who really has to be accounted for, who you cannot help off of under
Yep.
any circumstances if you're trying to operate a credible rotation defense. Um, those kind of guys, I think, would be really interesting. And I think it'd be a good way of saying, okay, we've got the talent, we're ready to go. Let's bring this guy into the mix. I'm trying to think who else would be some interesting players.
Do you want?
Uh,
Do you want me to go?
Absolutely, hit me.
So I've got a slightly different view. I like your view, and I love the process behind the Denny Avdia trade. I'm a massive Denny fan. He's obviously gotten off to like a quiet start in Portland, but I thought that like the thinking behind it was absolutely right, and I really hope that he pans out there. But I wonder if you go to teams like Memphis, like Houston, and you say you guys might not have room in your rotation, or Indiana. Indiana was the other team that I was going to think of. You might not
Mhm.
have room in your rotation for Gigi Jackson, Cam Whitmore, Jarris Walker / Ben Matherin. Let us give you first down the line. Let us maybe give you picks in your star trade this year. Houston, for example, is probably loading up to trade for a star in that 2025 offseason. maybe Utah does like this Jarrett Allen thing that the Cleveland Cavaliers did during the James Harden deal with
Mm,
the Brooklyn Nets, and they say we'll use our first round picks to go out and get a higher quality of young player than that we've got currently in the building. Like they kind of admit, yeah, maybe we screwed up during our initial draft process, but we're trying to rectify that really quickly, and we're trying to get some higher caliber young players through the door who don't necessarily like force them out of the race for a Debancer, Boozer, Peterson in 26. So I like the idea of Ben Matherin, Jarris Walker. I really like Matherin in Utah, actually. I think he could be
mhm.
really fun in a system where it's like he's being encouraged to get off the ball quite quickly. I know that Indiana do that, but I think that they do it in a slightly different way in Utah. But like Cam Whitmore is another guy that I'd love to see there. And Gigi is probably the least attainable of those. I think that he's going to come back in for Memphis, but he's your pie in the sky guy.
Yeah, I like all of those fits too, and I think those are interesting because you don't, like if you find yourself with one of the top guys in the 25 draft, like the lottery luck goes your way, I don't think you want to stop all the way and go, okay, now we have the guy.
Yeah.
What you need to do, in my opinion, is think, what if we had two of them?
Yes.
Like you need to hope that you can hit that outcome twice, find yourself at the top of the 26th draft. And what I think the best path forward is if they hit all the luck in this upcoming offseason, they get that top pick, make some small moves around the margins. Like you said, like a Jarris would be great. Like Matherin would be great. Kispert. Those aren't guys that are such talents in and of their own right that they're going to like catapult the team from like a 20 win team to like a 30 win team.
Hmm.
That's not the kind of player they are. So I think the goal should be, let's try to get two studs in the next two drafts. And then you look at what they have coming after that. Between the 2027, 2028, and 29 drafts, they have 9 first round picks,
Yeah.
including their own selections. Um, what I think the goal should be is, let's hit these draft outcomes. Let's keep Sexton. Let's keep Laurie. Let's try to figure out which of these other young guys can fit.
Hmm.
Obviously, I think the front court is spoken for, but what I think that they need to do is go for those players in the next couple of drafts, try to be as bad as you can to get
Hmm.
those kinds of players, and then you can turn around and say, okay, well, let's say we have Coop and Darren Peterson or something like that, which is just insane in and of itself,
Sure.
but possible. Or you have Dylan Harper and AJ Debanza if Ryan Smith gets his frozen envelope dream. Um, like, if you have those guys and you have a couple of solid established players who can coexist with everyone else, now you look at it and say, okay, now we have a real core together.
Yeah.
Let's start unloading these picks.
I,
Let's unload the younger players that we don't really think have a future around this core. And that's when this rebuild can really turn around, is when they get those guys and they start packaging everything. And now it's like, hey, whatever offer you have for your star player in terms of total first round picks, we can beat it. I promise you, we can beat it. And a lot can happen in 2 years. A lot of guys can have their fortunes change. Teams have their fortunes change. One other guy I wanted to bring up too is, like, you look at the Pelicans, who I don't think anyone would have predicted would be last in the Western Conference right now. Um, like, things can change all the time. It's like before this year, it was like, wow, this team is really exciting. They've done this and this and this. And
yeah.
now we have reports where it's like there are 3 guys who are safe and everyone else is on the table.
Yes.
So what I think Utah needs to do is keep themselves nimble enough while being in this really tough spot of tanking. Just ride it out for a couple of bad years and hope that the fortunes change for other teams. You hope that like these stars can be available because there's a non-zero possibility that in a couple of years they're like, well, Laurie is 29, Sexton's 28. We have these two young studs we've gotten through the draft, and we still have the capital to go out and acquire whatever star talent wants to come here.
Can you essentially work towards the Kyrie Irving Boston move that Danny Ainge pulled once he had the core of Brown and Tatum? Can
Right.
you like ballast that? Can you go and get Kyrie and then can you make your flashy Gordon Hayward free agency signing where suddenly, Charlie, 2 years ago, like you said, things changed very quickly. We're looking at a very, very middling, at least young core in Utah right now. The lottery balls fall in your favor. You maintain favor. You maintain the salary cap flexibility to go out there and one, trade for a start, and two, maybe even add someone in free agency. I know that Utah isn't LA, isn't Miami, but if the basketball environment is favorable enough, I definitely think that they still have enough options in the chamber that they could be tempting to someone. This is a real 1 hour and 16-minute idea, but like, I don't even know if I should say this. Could they go to New Orleans now and could they say, we will give you the worst of all of our firsts in 25, 26, 27, and John Collins, and you give us Zion?
Oh,
And the only thing about Zion is, you kind of know that he's going to have his injury struggles. Maybe you can sort of say to him like, hey, maybe minutes restrict for the next 18 months. He's not going to mind. Get fit, get healthy, make sure that your hamstrings are finally okay. Can you make like a really, really aggressive play for a star, almost hide them for 12 months, kind of like what they're doing with Lowry now? And then it's almost like you've got your star in the building and you've sorted out your pick situation. That's way too risky a move for someone with an actual job to make, but it's fine for a podcast to suggest. So I thought I'd put it out there, Charlie.
I'm interested in it because the guy's 24.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the injury concerns are very real, but you could look at it and say, we're not incentivized to be good for this season and for next season. So you can be as cautious as you want with the
Yes.
rehabbing. And it does interest me because it doesn't look like the price is very high.
Yeah.
Utah could just throw out a couple of those picks. And I could get behind it.
The thing is as well, with how cheap the Pelicans are, they could be really sold on like having a mid to late first rounder every year, where it's like we have our core, and then we can let a vet guy go. We can let a vet guy go, then we can bring in like another young guy. I think that could be really, really interesting from like a team building point of view long term. But Charlie, I think we've probably rambled on long enough. I've loved our jazz chat. Guys, go and read Charlie's article. Make sure you're following him on. Do you know what, Charlie? I'm going to do it. Following him on Blue Sky and Twitter. I'm leading with Blue Sky these days now. But yeah, I've had a ton of fun talking about a team that, like we said, their future could look very different in 6 weeks, 6 months, 12 months, etc. It's all up in the air for the Jazz at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a ton of fun. Go check the article out, and I'll have more coming down the pipeline, some jazz stuff too. So go check me out. Thanks again
Yeah,
for
guys,
having me on, Jack.
anytime, Charlie. Guys, we'll see you soon. Enjoy the NBA Cup tonight. This episode will have probably gone up a day or two afterwards. So, yeah, thanks for listening all the way through. Make sure to tune back in for another episode of The Drop Step.